She actually called the police on me for parking in my own driveway. 6:47 a.m. Two patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing against the dawn, my muddy F-50 sitting squarely on my concrete pad completely within my property lines. And there stood Connie Rendell on the sidewalk, arms crossed, wearing that smug grin like she'd already declared victory. When the officer stepped out, she immediately pointed at me and said, "I pay your salary." Arrest him. That's when I realized this wasn't about my truck blocking her view. It was about control.power. That brand of small-town tyranny that grinds decent people down every single day. But Connie didn't realize she'd made a huge mistake and error in judgment that would cost her. She had no clue I was a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. 23 years of neutralizing threats far more dangerous than a self-appointed suburban enforcer with an HO badge. So tell me, what would you have done? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. And where are you watching from? Let's see how many of you are dealing with neighborhood tyrants right now. Let me back up. My name's Vance Hartwick, Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army Intelligence, 23 years active duty. I'd just gone into reserve status, 1 weekend a month, just enough to stay sharp. After 2 decades of rotating between bases, packing up every 18 months, and sleeping in places where mortar fire doubled as an alarm clock, I finally bought real land for acres in Pinewood Estates, Colorado. Quiet, open. Surrounded by trees. My wife, Marina, an ICU nurse, tougher than half the soldiers I've led, was thrilled. Our son was at West Point. Our daughter was studying engineering at CU Boulder. This was supposed to be our calm chapter. Each morning, I'd pour black coffee from my steel percolator, step out onto the porch, and just breathe. Frost crunching under my boots, pine resin mingling with the diesel from my truck, cold air that didn't taste like dust or burning oil. It was perfect for about 8 weeks. Pinewood Estates sits in the hills outside Colorado Springs, 47 homes total, a mix of retirees and young families. The whole is voluntary, mostly a social group that plans block parties and debates mailbox colors. And then there's Connie Rendell, 52, vice president of that same HOA. Married to Garrett, a real estate lawyer who's rarely home. No kids. They live on the corner in the biggest house, landscaped so precisely it looks like a surgeon laid every blade of grass himself. Her lawn reeks of chemical fertilizer, sharp and acrid enough to sting your nose if you get too close. She does these evening patrols, clicking down the street in her heels like a countdown clock. Click, click, click. She treats the whole like her personal enforcement squad. Everything's about property values and community standards, but if you listen carefully, you catch the subtext. She's complained about transient renters. That's the Hispanic family 3 doors down, and call the veterans work van clutter. You get the idea. 2 weeks after we moved in, Connie showed up with a welcome packet. She smiled, shook my hand, and waited while I flipped through the papers. One section was highlighted in yellow: vehicles over 6,000 pounds. Must be garaged or parked behind the fence line. My truck. 6,400 pounds. I looked up. She was still smiling. Just a friendly reminder, she said sweetly. We like to keep things neat. I nodded, thanked her, and closed the door. Marina, watching from the kitchen, said flatly, "That woman's going to be trouble." "Maybe," I answered. She gave me that look, the one that says, "You're being too optimistic, and it's going to bite you." She was right. 12 weeks later, I got back from a weekend drill covered in mud after 2 straight days of field exercises, no sleep, the kind of training that keeps your instincts alive. My truck looked like it had just come from a war zone, because in a way, it had. I parked it on my driveway, 10 feet off the street, entirely on my property, planning to wash it later that afternoon. Sunday morning, 7 a.m. Connie knocked. I opened the door, coffee halfway to my lips. "That truck needs to be moved immediately," she said, pointing like it was roadkill. "It's an eyesore." I kept my voice steady. "It's on my property, ma'am. I'll clean it this afternoon." Her face turned crimson. "We'll see about that," she snapped before clicking away in double-time heels. From the kitchen, Marina called. "Told you." Monday morning, 6:45. I'm pouring my second coffee when I see flashing lights to sheriff's cars rolling up slow, Connie standing on the sidewalk, directing them like she's calling in an airstrike. That's when things really kicked off. The deputies stepped out, already doing the math in their heads. Both young, professional mid-30s maybe. The taller one, name tag Red Kraus, spotted the military decal on my truck, then looked at me standing there in an army PT shirt. I saw his shoulders relax just slightly. He approached, polite but careful. "Morning, sir," he said. "We got a report about an illegally parked vehicle blocking access." He glanced at the truck, then at the wide-open street, then back at me with a look that said he already knew this was a waste of time. "On my own driveway," I said evenly. Kraus exhaled, scribbled a note, then went to check. He gauged the distance from the truck to the street, eyed the concrete pad, then turned toward Connie, who was still standing there, arms crossed like a principal waiting for detention to start. "Ma'am," Kraus called out, "the vehicle's fully on private property." "There's no violation here," Connie's voice rang out across the yard, sharp and full of outrage. "I want a report filed. He's violating covenant standards. This is a voluntary community, and he refuses to comply." Kraus walked back toward me, clearly suppressing the urge to roll his eyes. "Sir, we're marking this as unfounded. Have a good day." He handed me a card with the incident number, gave a polite nod, and returned to his cruiser. As the patrol cars drove off, I felt that old familiar rush, a prickle of adrenaline at the base of my skull. The same feeling I used to get moments before a mission briefing when you knew the situation was about to get complicated. That evening, an email popped up in my inbox from Dale Patton, the whole president, 68 years old, retired insurance adjuster, and the type who'd apologize for winning at poker. The subject line read, "Courtesy reminder vehicle placement." The email itself was textbook bureaucratic jargon, talk of community aesthetics and voluntary compliance. But Dale had CC'd every homeowner on the street. All 18 of them. Marina leaned over my shoulder, read it, and said, "She's building a paper trail." She was right. So, I replied to all, kept it calm, factual. I referenced my property survey, pointed out that there was no enforceable covenant on record with the county, and attached a PDF of my plat map clearly showing my property boundaries. From the kitchen, the sound of Marina's tea kettle started to whistle, the smell of chamomile and honey drifting through the air, blending with the wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. For a brief moment, I thought maybe that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I stepped outside to grab the newspaper, and there it was. An orange traffic cone sitting right at the edge of my driveway, not mine. I checked my security footage. At 11 p.m., a silver Lexus had pulled up. Passenger door opened. Garrett Rendell climbed out, set the cone down, and drove off. 40 seconds, start to finish. I picked up the cone, walked 3 houses down, and left it neatly on Connie's immaculate porch with a handwritten note underneath. "Believe you dropped this." Marina saw me heading back and just shook her head. "You're poking the bear," she warned. "Bear poked first," I said. That afternoon, a county code enforcement truck rolled into my driveway. Out stepped a man in his 40s wearing a county polo and the weary expression of someone who'd seen every kind of neighborhood feud imaginable. Hartwick," he said, glancing at a clipboard. "Got a complaint about unpermitted grading work. You done any earth moving recently?" I shook my head. "Bought the place 8 months ago. Haven't touched the thing." He walked the property line, checked the drainage, surveyed the slope, and came back shaking his head. "Man, I'm sorry. This is the 5th bogus complaint I've had from this street just this month. Somebody out here's got way too much free time." I offered him a cup of coffee, and we stood on the porch talking for a few minutes while he vented about nuisance calls. Then he mentioned something that caught my attention. "You know," Raoul said, lowering his voice, "you can request a property inspection report from the county for $15. It lists every complaint ever filed for your address. Guys in your situation use it to show a pattern of harassment if things go sideways." He scribbled the department number on the back of his card. I remembered a contractor friend from Fort Carson who dealt with a similar neighbor, anonymous reports, endless inspections, the works. He'd gotten that same report, took it to a lawyer, and the nonsense stopped cold within a week. So I filed the request that same afternoon. $15 well spent, I figured. What I didn't realize yet was how much worse things were about to get or how valuable that report would become. 3 days later, I started noticing cars slowing as they passed my house, unfamiliar faces giving my property the once-over like they were scouting it. Turns out Connie had been busy. She'd started a petition called the Voluntary Covenant Enforcement Initiative, going door-to-door collecting signatures and pitching it as a way to protect neighborhood property values. She even pulled recent appraisal data showing a slight dip in prices over the last quarter, blaming it on commercial vehicles and non-conforming property maintenance, thinly veiled references to my truck and the veterans' work van to streets. Over. By week's end, she'd gathered 11 signatures out of 47 homes. Mostly older residents who didn't know the details and just signed whatever she handed them while she smiled and talked about keeping the neighborhood beautiful. Then came the letter. No stamp, no return address, just a plain sheet of printer paper in my mailbox, the message typed in Times New Roman. Military types think they're above the rules. Sell and move back to base housing where you belong. Marina found it first when she came home from her hospital shift. I watched her face shift from confusion to fury in seconds. I held the paper up to the light and caught it, the faint scent of lavender. That expensive lotion Connie wore everywhere. The one Marina once said smelled like a funeral home, and now that scent was clinging to a threat letter sitting in my mailbox. I slipped the page into a plastic sleeve and filed it into my growing evidence folder right between the photos of the orange cone and the bogus code complaint the following Tuesday. Marina came home from another night shift, shaking with anger I hadn't seen in years. Her car had a parking ticket on the windshield issued while she was working parked legally, in a two-hour zone that ended at 6 p.m. Somehow, she ended up getting ticketed anyway. She fought it immediately and had it dismissed within 48 hours because it was blatantly false, but the ordeal still took a toll. After a 12-hour shift where she'd already lost to patients, the extra stress left her completely drained. Then, 3 days later, the hospital received an anonymous call. Someone reported that an ICU nurse on the night shift was showing up to work intoxicated, and the caller knew Marina's schedule, her department, even the color of her car in the parking lot. Policy required the hospital to investigate. Zero tolerance. Within hours, blood tests and supervisor statements cleared her completely, but the damage was done. The humiliation of being escorted off the floor and interrogated in front of coworkers crushed her. She came home that morning still in her scrubs, tears running silently down her face. She went after my job, Vance, Marina said, voice barely above a whisper. She called my hospital and tried to get me fired. I felt my jaw clench, that same involuntary tightening that happens when I'm locking into decision mode. Marina recognized the look instantly. She'd seen it before every deployment, every time I shifted from husband mode into operator mode. I need to make some calls, I said. Marina just nodded, poured herself some tea, and said quietly, burn her down. The first person I called was Captain Lynette Torrin, an old JAG contact who'd helped me out a couple of years earlier when a landlord tried to withhold our entire security deposit for hanging pictures. Lynette picked up on the second ring, listened carefully to the whole story, then said, first off, your neighbor's an idiot. Second, if she's making false claims to your wife's employer, that's tortious interference, and you could sue her into next week. But her most valuable advice was simpler: document everything. Create a clear paper trail, she said. File a harassment report with the sheriff, even if nothing happens right now. Courts love timelines. If she keeps escalating, you'll have dated evidence showing a pattern, and that's gold. The next morning, I filed the report with Deputy Krause, the same officer from the driveway incident. This time, he took it seriously, asked the right questions, and told me they'd flag it in their system. Then Lynette mentioned something I hadn't considered. In Colorado, HOA letters registered as nonprofits are required to make their financials public. Costs about $50 and takes a couple of weeks. I've seen board members using whole money like their own checking accounts. If there's something shady, that's your leverage. I submitted the records request that same afternoon. $50 felt like the best investment I'd made since buying body armor before my first deployment. What I didn't know was how revealing those records would turn out to be. 2 weeks later, Connie called an emergency whole meeting and strong-armed Dale into sending out a notice with just 24 hours warning, conveniently ensuring most residents couldn't make it due to work or other commitments. Still, 19 neighbors showed up. Mostly curious since the agenda was maddeningly vague, discussion on enforcement mechanisms. That was it. Connie came prepared, full slideshow projected onto the community center wall using Dale's ancient laptop. For 15 solid minutes, we watched her flip through photo after photo of my truck from different angles, close-ups of survey stakes with pink tape, even snapshots of my security cameras. Her proposal? Voluntary fines of $100 per violation and weekend patrols by private security, a plan that would cost each household around $40 a month, according to her spreadsheet. I sat in the back row, arms crossed, just watching her perform. And honestly, I had to respect the sheer dedication to spite. The woman had built a 20-slide presentation, complete with bar graphs and talking points about declining property values, all because she didn't like seeing my truck in my own driveway. Halfway through, Marcus Tillman raised his hand. Mid-50s, postal worker, lives 4 houses down, the guy with solid common sense. Connie, he said evenly, this feels personal. His truck's on his property. Why is it even our business? Connie's expression hardened. Because people like him don't respect community standards, she said. The phrase people like him landed like a grenade. The air in the room went cold. Several neighbors exchanged uneasy looks. Dale cleared his throat and said diplomatically, maybe we should table this discussion until we've reviewed the bylaws more closely. Which was his gentle way of saying the meeting had gone completely off the rails. As people began to file out, Connie turned toward me and said loudly, you think you're untouchable? I just smiled, gave a small nod, and walked out into the evening air that smelled faintly of asphalt and freshly cut grass. That night, Marina and I sat at the kitchen table going through the whole financial packet that had arrived 3 days earlier. 18 months of expenses printed on cheap copy paper and stapled together like a high school project. It didn't take long to spot the issues. Connie had billed over $8,400 in administrative expenses during that period. The receipts were vague line items like office supplies, consulting fees, and community outreach materials. One entry jumped out right away, $1,200 paid to Garrett Rendell's law firm for covenant review services, basically. Her husband charging the hoe to read documents he should have reviewed for free as the spouse of a board member. I photographed every single page with my phone while Marina sat beside me, watching silently. She'd still been hit with a citation, somehow. She fought it and had it tossed within 48 hours. It was plainly bogus, but after a 12-hour shift in which she'd lost to patients, the extra stress wiped her out. 3 days later, the hospital got an anonymous tip. An ICU nurse on the night shift was allegedly arriving for work drunk. The caller knew Marina's shift, her unit, even the color of her car in the lot. The hospital had no choice but to investigate zero-tolerance policy. Blood work and supervisor interviews cleared her within hours, but being pulled off the floor and questioned in front of colleagues humiliated her. She arrived home that morning still in scrubs, tears tracking down her face. She went after my job, Vance, Marina murmured. I felt my jaw clamp, that same tightness that shows up when I'm switching into decision mode. Marina recognized it instantly. She'd seen it before deployments and other times I had to flip from husband to operator. I need to make some calls, I told her. She poured tea, nodded, and said simply, burn her down. My first call was to Captain Lynette Torrin, an old JED contact who'd helped me with a landlord fight a couple years back. Lynette answered on the second ring, listened without interrupting, then said, first, your neighbor's an idiot. Second, if she's filing false reports with your wife's employer, that's tortious interference. You could sue her into next week. Her best practical advice, though, was straightforward. Document everything. Build a paper trail, she said. File a harassment report with the sheriff even if nothing comes of it now. Courts love timelines. If she escalates, dated evidence showing a pattern is gold. The next morning I filed that harassment report with Deputy Krause, the same officer from the driveway call. This time he treated it seriously, took thorough notes, and said they'd flag it. Lynette also pointed out a legal angle I hadn't thought of. Colorado requires nonprofits that register as HOA letters to make financial records public. It costs about $50 and takes a couple of weeks, but it's how you catch board members who treat association funds like their personal ATM. I filed the records request that afternoon. The $50 felt like a smart buy, like the purchase of body armor before my first deployment. I had no idea how messy Connie's books would be. 2 weeks later, Connie called an emergency whole meeting and pushed Dale to send the notice with only 24 hours lead time, ensuring most people couldn't attend. 19 neighbors turned up anyway, mostly out of curiosity because the agenda was maddeningly vague: discuss enforcement mechanisms. Connie had a slideshow queued on Dale's ancient laptop and spent 15 minutes showing photo after photo of my truck close-ups, survey stakes with pink flagging tape, even snaps of my security cameras. She proposed voluntary $100 fines per violation and hiring private security for weekend patrols, roughly a $40 monthly hit per household, according to her spreadsheet. I sat in the back with my arms folded, watching her put on a show. I'll admit, the dedication to pettiness was almost impressive. She had a 20-slide deck with bar charts about property value declines, all because she disliked seeing my truck. Halfway through, Marcus Tillman, a postal worker in his 50s who lives a few houses down and has always seemed level-headed, raised his hand. "Connie," he said calmly, "this feels personal. His truck's on his property. Why is this any of ours?" Connie's reply landed like a grenade. "Because people like him don't respect community standards." Those words froze the room. Several neighbors exchanged looks. Dale cleared his throat and suggested tabling the discussion until the bylaws could be reviewed more closely, his polite way of admitting the meeting was a mess. As people left, Connie turned to me and shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You think you're untouchable?" I smiled, nodded, and stepped out into the parking lot. They are smelling of fresh asphalt and cut grass. That night Marina and I spread the whole financial packet across the kitchen table, 18 months of expenses photocopied and stapled together like a rushed school project. It didn't take long to spot red flags. Connie had charged the whole $8,400 in administrative expenses over that period. The receipts were vague: office supplies, consulting fees, community outreach. One line jumped out immediately. $1,200 paid to Garrett Rendell's law firm for covenant review services, basically her husband billing the association to do work he should have done pro bono as a board member's spouse. I photographed every page while Marina, who'd spent 15 years managing IQ budgets and could spot financial oddities in a heartbeat, circled 3 entries in red ink. "This is self-dealing," she said. "Nonprofits can't pay board members or their relatives without full disclosure and a board vote. If there was no record of approval, it's fraud." I'd picked up enough nonprofit law during a deployment in Afghanistan, working with NGOs, to know board members who funnel money to themselves can be removed and sometimes prosecuted, but I wanted Colorado-specific confirmation. A quick search verified Marina's suspicion. Any financial benefit to a board member requires disclosure and a conflict of interest vote by the board. There was no such record in the meeting minutes Dale had posted online. The next morning Marcus caught me at the mailbox. He shuffled over, hands in his pockets, like he had something to say but wasn't sure how to start. "I've lived here 9 years, he said at last. "Connie's driven 3 families away that I know of, always finds a reason. Noise complaints, property maintenance, whatever. But it's never the white folks. Notice that. He told me she'd filed noise complaints against him for loud music even though he listens to NPR on a clock radio. She'd reported the Hispanic family's beagle as vicious. She'd labeled the veterans' work van abandoned until the sheriff told her to stop. If you're putting together something to push back," Marcus said, "count me in." I'm tired of watching good people leave because one woman thinks she runs the neighborhood. I shook his hand and promised, I'll be in touch. Walking back, I could hear Connie's shrill voice through her open window, ranting to someone about the military troublemaker. I smiled. People like Connie feed on control. When they sense it slipping, they make mistakes. I intended to wait for one. I couldn't sleep, so around 2 a.m. I sat up at the kitchen table with my laptop and started digging through public county records the way I used to comb through intel reports a patient, looking for patterns others missed. Property records, tax assessments, court filings, all available if you know where to look and can navigate glorified bureaucratic rabbit holes. I pulled Connie and Garrett's property record and stared at the screen for a long minute. $47,000 in unpaid property tax liens stretching back 2 years, with foreclosure proceedings paused because of a hardship claim filed 6 months prior. Cross-referencing court records turned up a malpractice settlement 8 months earlier. Garrett's firm paid $230,000 to a client over a botched real estate deal. Suddenly the picture snapped into focus like a blurred surveillance shot resolving. Connie wasn't policing property values out of civic duty. She was terrified her financial collapse would tank home prices and expose her. Every complaint, petition, and meeting she'd organized was projection, a frantic attempt to distract others while she spiraled. It was almost pitiable, the way people in free fall grab at others to feel less alone. I'd seen the same behavior overseas among corrupt officials right before everything fell apart. Sitting there in the kitchen with the fridge humming and yesterday's coffee still in the pot, I realized Connie was no different, just performing on a smaller, more pathetic stage. Marina shuffled down in a bathrobe, poured herself water, and saw my mission face. "You found something?" she said, not really asking. I turned the laptop to show the tax lien document. "She's broke," I said. "The house is underwater. Garrett's firm is bleeding cash, and she's been running a shell game with traffic cones and whole petitions to distract everyone. She's 6 months from losing everything." Marina read the papers and watched her expression shift from surprise to something like pity. "One of the reasons I love her, even when someone attacks us, she can still see their humanity." "Will you use this?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not directly, that's too crude and makes me look petty. But if she's this desperate, she'll overplay her hand. When she does, I want to be ready." After 23 years in military intelligence, I'd learned the best tactic isn't a direct strike at an enemy's weakness. It's applying measured pressure until they panic and reveal themselves, while you document every misstep. So over the next week I made small, deliberate moves to remind Connie whose property she kept staring at every morning. I parked my truck prominently in the driveway every day, washed and waxed until it shone, and I installed a flagpole in the front yard, fully within code. The flagpole went up exactly 6 feet from the property line, and I flew the American flag with military precision, raised at dawn, lowered at dusk, transforming a simple act into a quiet declaration. I even added a large decorative boulder near the edge of the yard, one of those hefty landscaping rocks that runs about $300 and needs machinery to move. I positioned it perfectly so that Connie could see it every morning from her kitchen window as she drank her coffee and glared at my house like it was an insult carved in brick and wood. Everything I did was completely above board, lawful, properly permitted, and intentional. The message was simple: this was my property. I'd earned it through decades of service, and no amount of petty bullying was going to chase me off. Within 3 days, I saw her pacing her driveway, phone in hand, gesturing like a storm in motion. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was sharp enough to tell the whole story. One evening, as I grilled chicken on the porch, the smell of barbecue smoke drifting through the cool pine air, Marina watched Connie from across the street and said softly, "You're poking the bear." I flipped a chicken breast and replied, "I'm giving her rope." We both knew what that meant. Desperate people don't back down, they dig deeper, lash out harder, and make the kind of reckless mistakes that eventually leave a trail you can take to court. And that was exactly what I was waiting for. 2 days after the flagpole went up, Marcus showed up at my door with a six-pack and the grim kind of look that meant this wasn't a social call. We settled on the back porch, out of Connie's line of sight, and he got right to it. I talked to Yolanda Sims and Gil Farnsworth, he said, twisting the cap off his beer. They want in. Connie's been after them too. Yolanda, an elementary school teacher and single mom who lived 6 houses down, had been accused of violating county safety codes because of her daughter's backyard trampoline. Connie had reported it as a public hazard, prompting an inspector visit that scared Yolanda half to death before declaring everything compliant. Gil, 71, and a Korean War veteran, hadn't been spared either. Connie tried to force him to take down a memorial flagpole he'd erected for fallen comrades, citing a completely fabricated height rule. So what's the move? Marcus asked. I appreciated that he didn't bother with small talk or suggest walking away. He understood what I did. People like Connie don't stop until they're forced to. That Saturday morning, we gathered in my kitchen. The 4 of us drank coffee while Marina jotted notes on a yellow legal pad and listened as everyone shared their stories. A clear pattern emerged, one too obvious to ignore. Connie wasn't enforcing community standards. She was targeting people, the ones who didn't fit her narrow vision of the neighborhood. Folks who worked blue-collar jobs, whose lawns weren't manicured to country club perfection, whose skin was a shade darker, whose cars weren't brand new. She'd weaponized the whole to wear them down until they either gave up or left. We're not breaking any rules, I told them, spreading out the HOA financial documents across the table. We're using them by the book, fully documented, fully legal. I walked them through what I'd uncovered: $8,400 in suspicious administrative expenses and a $1,200 payment to Garrett's law firm with no board approval. As they read, anger gave way to something else: hope. For the first time, they saw this wasn't just about enduring Connie's harassment, it was about holding her accountable. From there, the plan took shape like a mission briefing: logical, structured, deliberate. That was how I'd been trained. Define the objective. Assess the assets. Execute with precision. Step 1. File a formal complaint with the Colorado Secretary of State about the HOA's financial misconduct. Lynette had already confirmed that any nonprofit board member caught engaging in self-dealing, paying themselves or family without proper votes or disclosure, could be removed. Marcus volunteered to submit the paperwork, keeping my name out of it and avoiding any claim of personal revenge. Step 2. Call for a special whole meeting. The bylaws allowed it if 20% of homeowners petitioned at 10 signatures out of 47 homes. We already had 4. Gil knew 5 others who couldn't stand Connie, and Yolanda promised to talk to 3 families on her street who'd been quietly enduring her nonsense for years. Step 3. Prepare a presentation: calm, factual, emotion-free, laying out the financial mismanagement and ending with a proposal for an immediate board recall vote. Step 4. Alert the press. The Pinewood Gazette loved HOA scandal stories. And Yolanda still had a contact from when they'd covered her school's charity fundraiser. Gil, quiet until now, finally spoke. You really think this will work? He asked, voice heavy with weariness, the sound of a man who'd already fought one war overseas and never expected to face another one on his own street. It'll work, I said. People like Connie count on everyone being too wary or too afraid to stand up to them. But once someone does, their whole power structure falls apart. Marcus lifted his beer. To collapsing houses of cards, he toasted, and we all drank. After everyone left, Marina found me at the sink rinsing out coffee mugs. She slipped her arms around me from behind. Why not just move? She murmured. We could sell, go somewhere quiet, start fresh. I turned toward her. I've spent 2 decades in places ruled by fear and intimidation, I said. I'm not letting that take root on my own street. And our kids are watching, one at West Point, the other studying engineering. They're learning how we deal with bullies. I want them to see that you don't run, you don't hide. You stand your ground with truth and the law on your side. Marina kissed my forehead. Then let's fight, she said. And in that moment, I knew we'd face whatever came next together, just as we had every deployment, every relocation, every challenge the Army had ever thrown our way. A week before the whole meeting, I woke up at 5:30 am. As usual. I brewed coffee, went outside to get the paper, and instantly knew something was off. My truck sat lower than normal. All for tires slashed clean through the sidewalls. Precise cuts, intentional damage about $800 worth. I stood there barefoot in the driveway, the cold morning air visible in my breath, and felt that old, steady anger rise. Not the wild kind, but the cold, controlled kind that comes from years of facing threats and learning exactly how to dismantle them piece by piece. I checked my security footage. There it was to 17 a.m. A hooded figure approached from the street, crouched by each tire, worked fast, and disappeared the way they'd come. The image showed their height and movement clearly, but the face was obscured. Whoever it was knew exactly where my cameras were. I filed a police report within the hour. Deputy Krause showed up looking exhausted even though it wasn't yet 7 o'clock a.m. He reviewed the footage, took photos, and jotted notes before confirming what I already expected. Height and gait match your neighbor, he said, but without a clear face or more proof, we can't make charges stick. You'll need more evidence. I handed him a printed record of every incident from the past for months: false police reports, code enforcement complaints, the hospital accusation against Marina, the anonymous letter. He flipped through them with the grim look of someone who'd seen this pattern before. Keep documenting, he advised. If she escalates, and she will, you'll have what you need for a restraining order, at least. Insurance paid for the tires. But that wasn't the point. The point was that Connie had crossed a line from harassment to property damage, which meant she was panicking and slipping up. After Krause left, I crouched beside the truck, running my hand along the shredded rubber. The air smelled of hot tire and the metallic tang of exposed steel belts, sharp, deliberate, and familiar. I thought of insurgents I'd dealt with who believed sabotage would break our resolve. They never understood that every attack only made us more methodical, more patient, more determined to finish the mission. 3 days later, the smear campaign began, and I'll admit, I didn't see it coming. I'd underestimated her desperation. A fake Facebook profile appeared, a concerned Pinewood resident posting in the neighborhood group that a new neighbor, a supposedly aggressive ex-military man, was threatening families, filming children, and had a violent history. The accusations were vague enough to avoid outright lies, but specific enough that everyone knew they meant me. Within hours, neighbors shared the posts before noticing the account was only 3 days old, with no real pictures or history. Yolanda spotted it first. She took screenshots before the posts vanished and called me right away. "Vance, you need to see this," she said, her voice shaking with protective anger. I scrolled through the images, feeling a cold twist in my chest, not for myself, but for Marina and the kids. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was an attack on our name, our standing, and a community where reputation is everything, and a rumor can stain you for years. That evening, my son called from West Point. He tried to sound calm, but there was tension in his voice. "Dad, someone tagged me in a post saying you're threatening people in the neighborhood. What's going on?" I explained everything: the harassment, the fake account, the slashed tires. He was quiet for a beat, then said, "You always told me to document everything and let the truth speak for itself. Are you doing that?" Despite everything, I smiled. Hearing my own advice echoed back by a young man who'd grown up while I wasn't looking reminded me exactly why this fight mattered. I replied. "And when this is done, I'm going to show you exactly how we handled it. Because one day, you'll run into someone just like this, and you need to understand that you don't fight lies with rage. You fight them with evidence, patience, and the discipline to let your opponent destroy themselves." After hanging up, I sat in my office, printed the fake Facebook screenshots, and added them to my expanding case file. I realized I'd stopped feeling anything about it because it had become just another mission. Another operation to execute with the same precision I'd relied on for 23 years. The special whole meeting was 2 days away, and I had my entire dossier ready: timeline, photos, financial documents, witness statements, all spiral-bound and organized for distribution across the street. I was certain Connie was assembling her own stack of papers. likely filled with excuses and half-truths. Unaware she'd already lost the battle the moment she decided to counter facts with emotion. 3 days before the meeting, Dale sent an email at 10 p.m. on a Sunday titled "Meeting Postponed Indefinitely." It contained a single paragraph citing unforeseen scheduling conflicts and potential legal issues as reasons for the delay, with a vague promise to reschedule later. I read it twice, clenched my jaw, and immediately dialed Dale's cell. It rang 6 times before he answered, sounding exactly like a man who had been dreading this call since he hit send. "Dale, who told you to cancel the meeting?" I asked, keeping my tone calm and professional, though I wanted to shake him through the phone. There was a pause. I could hear a late-night talk show playing faintly in the background, the canned laughter making the whole situation feel absurd. "Connie said there were legal concerns," he finally stammered. "Garrett looked over the bylaws and said we might expose the board to liability if we go forward without proper notice and procedure." I just thought I cut him off. "Dale, the bylaws require a special meeting within 14 days of receiving a valid petition signed by 20% of homeowners. We submitted 11 signatures, 23%. If you don't hold this meeting, any homeowner can sue the board for breach of fiduciary duty. And I've got an attorney ready to take that case." It was a bluff. I didn't actually have a lawyer lined up, but Dale didn't know that. I could hear him breathing heavily, calculating the cost of a lawsuit versus the ease of simply letting the meeting happen. "Fine," he said finally, defeat weighing down his voice. Thursday, 7 p.m. Community Center. "I'll send out the revised notice tomorrow morning." When Thursday came, there carried that same charged anticipation I used to feel before mission briefings when everyone senses something big is about to happen, but no one knows exactly how. By 6:30, the community center parking lot was already full. From my truck, I watched neighbors arrive in small groups, some curious, others anxious, a few visibly angry, their minds made up before a single word was spoken. 41 of 47 homeowners had RSVP'd, the highest turnout our HOA had ever seen. As I walked toward the entrance with Marina beside me, Marcus, Gil, and Yolanda trailing a few steps behind, I felt the weight of what was coming settle over me like body armor before patrol. Heavy, necessary, impossible to remove until the job was done. Inside, the room smelled faintly of burnt coffee from an old pot in the corner, mixed with the harsh tang of fresh floor wax. Metal folding chairs groaned as people sat, pulling out their phones ready to record whatever happened next. Connie had arrived early and claimed a table at the front, where she'd arranged neat stacks of her own packets. I could see the glossy paper, the color-coded tabs, the telltale signs of someone over-preparing out of panic. She wore a navy blazer and pearls, her hair immaculate, makeup flawless. Each time someone entered, she glanced at the door, silently counting votes, trying to gauge if she still had enough support to survive the night. Garrett sat next to her, visibly uncomfortable in a designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. He scrolled through his phone with the bored expression of a man wishing he were anywhere else. Deputy Krause stood in the back, uniformed and alert there at my request. His presence wasn't just for security, it was my way of ensuring there'd be an official witness to everything that transpired. When our eyes met, he gave me a brief, knowing nod. Jenna Carlson from the Pinewood Gazette was seated in the last row, a notepad open, digital recorder beside her. Seeing her there told me everything I needed to know. Whatever unfolded tonight would be in print by Sunday morning, and that meant Connie's control over the story was gone. No more spinning the situation as a misunderstanding or a vendetta. No more hiding behind vague Facebook posts that vanished when reported. This time, the truth would have a witness. Dale rapped the gavel with a trembling hand and called the meeting to order, and you could feel the room hold its breath as he read the procedural statement in a flat, practiced tone that betrayed how nervous he still was. This special meeting has been called under Article 7, Section 3 of the HOA bylaws to address concerns raised by multiple homeowners about board governance and financial management, he announced. Then cleared his throat and looked at Connie with an expression that might have been an apology. "Ms. Rendell, as the petitioner requesting enforcement actions, You have the floor to present your case, he said. Connie rose, smoothed her blazer, and launched into a rehearsed speech about volunteer board members who sacrifice for the community only to be attacked by newcomers who don't understand local values. I watched her with a detached curiosity, the same way I used to listen to hostile interrogations overseas, because every excuse she offered just added more evidence to our file. The room was quiet except for her voice and the rustle of people shifting in their seats, and I knew the tide would turn in about 5 minutes. Before Connie finished her second paragraph, Marcus stood up from the middle row and spoke with the blunt authority of someone who's spent decades handling people on the mail route. Point of order, he said loudly. She's lying, and everyone in this room knows it. A ripple of gasps and murmurs ran through the crowd. Dale struck the gavel twice, flustered. Connie's face went from pale to flushed in seconds, her hands trembling on the podium. "Excuse me," she protested, her voice rising. "I am a volunteer board member who has dedicated 4 years to harassing neighbors who don't fit your idea of this community," Marcus cut in. "We're done pretending otherwise." Dale glanced at me helplessly. I rose, calm and deliberate. "Mr. Hartwick, you called this meeting, so you have the floor," he said. I walked to the front carrying a box of spiral-bound dossiers and began distributing them row by row. The room fell into stunned silence, broken only by pages turning and the occasional, "Oh my God," as people read. "My name is Lieutenant Colonel Vance Hartwick, U.S. Army Reserve," I said, standing at attention in that relaxed pre-dressed posture that comes naturally after years in uniform. "I've served this country for 23 years, and I moved to Pinewood Estates 8 months ago seeking peace after a life spent in conflict zones. Instead, my family and I have been targeted. My wife's career was threatened. My property was vandalized. All because one resident objected to my truck and my job." I clicked the remote, and the projector displayed the first slide, a timeline beginning with Connie's welcome packet and the highlighted vehicle restriction, running through false police calls, code enforcement complaints, the anonymous letter, the hospital incident involving Marina, and culminating with photos of my slashed tires. "This isn't about community standards," I said as the next slide showed the fake Facebook posts. "This is abuse of power." The room went completely silent. Heads were down in dossiers, then lifted to the screen, then to Connie, whose color had drained and whose hands clutched Garrett's arm as though she might collapse. I advanced to the financial slide: $8,400 in unexplained administrative expenses and a $1,200 payment to Garrett Rendell's law firm. The bylaws require board members to disclose any payments to family and to obtain a conflict of interest vote from the full board, I said. According to the meeting minutes posted online, no such vote was ever recorded. "That means Ms. Rendell has been steering association money to her husband's struggling firm without authorization." Connie's voice broke as she tried to answer. "This is slander, Garrett. Do something." Garrett didn't leap to her defense. He stared at his phone and, when he finally spoke, his tone was flat and weary. "Connie, please. Just stop." A low murmur spread through the room as neighbors compared the documents in their hands to the slides. The puzzle pieces came together for them in real time, obvious to anyone paying attention, but no one had bothered to assemble them until now. I raised a hand and the room quieted. "This morning I filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Secretary of State's nonprofit division," I told them. "They will audit the HOA's finances, and if they find what I expect, there will be consequences. But that's not the only reason we're here." I turned to face the assembled homeowners instead of Connie. "You elected a board to serve this community," I said. "Instead, they've been serving themselves and weaponizing home rules against neighbors they dislike." Marcus was harassed. Gil was harassed. Yolanda was harassed. Even the Mononatoya family on Spruce Street faced the same treatment, and it ends tonight. I paused for a moment, then stated clearly, "I move for an immediate recall vote of the entire board, effective now, with new elections to be held within 30 days. A woman I didn't recognize from the third row raised her hand. I second that motion. Dale looked like he wished the ground would swallow him, but he dutifully followed protocol. Called for discussion, none came, and then moved to a vote. All in favor of recalling the current board? He asked. 38 hands went up. Connie shot to her feet, snatched her purse, and stormed toward the door, Garrett close behind. The sound of the metal door slamming shut echoed through the community center like a final gavel strike, sharp, decisive, and permanent. When the meeting adjourned and people began filtering out into the parking lot, Jenna Carlson approached me near my truck. "Mind a quick interview?" she asked, recorder poised between us. "What do you want the public to understand about tonight?" I thought for a second before answering. "HOA letters aren't inherently bad," I said. "They serve a purpose. But power without accountability breeds corruption. When board members start using their roles to target others instead of serving the community, homeowners have to step up, ask questions, get involved, and demand transparency." She followed up, asking if my military experience had influenced how I handled things. I shook my head. "This isn't about rank or training. It's about doing what's right and refusing to be silenced by intimidation. Anyone could have done this. They just needed to care enough to act and believe that truth still matters." Jenna snapped a picture of me with Marina, Marcus, Gil, and Yolanda under the streetlights. We were exhausted, but smiling. I knew that photo would make the local front page, and I hoped it would inspire someone else facing their own neighborhood bully to take a stand. The new board elections took place the following week. I watched from my porch as neighbors I'd barely spoken to before lined up to vote for once an election that truly mattered. Marcus was elected president with 42 votes. Yolanda became treasurer. Gil took the secretary position. Ironically, the three people Connie had targeted the most were now running the very organization she had weaponized for 4 years. When they asked me to join, I declined. I told them I just wanted to be left in peace to sit on my porch, sip coffee, and watch the sunrise without drama. Marcus laughed and said that was exactly why they wanted me on the board, but he respected my choice. 3 weeks later, the state audit confirmed everything I'd uncovered: $8,400 in undocumented expenses, $1,200 in unauthorized payments to a board member's family, and a formal recommendation that the former board reimburse the HOA and face possible fraud charges. Within 2 days of the audit's release, Connie and Garrett quietly listed their house for sale. They were gone within 60 days, selling for $30,000 below asking just to escape before foreclosure proceedings picked back up. I never pressed charges for the vandalism or harassment. It wasn't worth dragging out. The fight was already over. But Deputy Krause later told me that keeping the reports on file likely stopped Connie from pulling the same stunts elsewhere. Any background check would now show a clear record of her behavior. The new board's first act was to revoke the arbitrary fines Connie had imposed and redirect the HOA's focus toward real community building: quarterly barbecues, a holiday lights event without competition or judgment, and a genuine neighborhood watch aimed at safety, not lawn policing. Marcus even proposed the Pinewood Unity Scholarship, $500 a year for a local high school student pursuing a career in public service teaching, nursing, the military, or social work. Their first fundraiser, a pancake breakfast, brought in 43 families and raised $2,100 in a single morning. I found myself at the griddle flipping pancakes while Marina poured coffee, and kids laughed and kicked soccer balls in the field behind the center. The air was thick with the smell of maple syrup and buttermilk batter, and for the first time since moving to Pinewood Estates, it actually felt like a neighborhood, not a battleground. 2 years later, Yolanda's daughter won the scholarship and used it to start nursing school. Watching Yolanda cry tears of joy at the ceremony reminded me why any of this mattered, not because I needed to win against a petty tyrant, but because decent people deserve to live without fear in their own community. 6 months after things finally calmed down, my son graduated from West Point. During the ceremony, he pulled me aside and said something that stayed with me ever since. "Dad," he told me, "when Connie was posting all that stuff about you online and I called because I was worried, you said that real courage isn't loud, it's steady, deliberate, and lets the truth speak for itself." I think about that every day. That might have been the proudest moment of my life, realizing that facing down a nightmare neighbor had somehow taught my son a lifelong lesson about integrity that he'd carry with him as an officer. We held a dinner at our house afterward. Marina cooked, our daughter came home from college, and we invited Marcus and his family, Phil, Yolanda and her daughter. And even the new couple who'd bought Connie's old house, a friendly pair with a baby, who'd already asked how to join the neighborhood watch. My truck sat clean and polished in the driveway, and not a single person mentioned it because now it was just a truck. The way it should have been all along. Later that evening, after everyone left and Marina and I were cleaning the kitchen, she asked if I truly meant what I'd told the reporter, that anyone could have done what I did. I thought for a moment while drying a plate and said, yeah, the only real advantage I had was stubbornness and a good filing system. Everything else the public records, the bylaws, the documentation, it's all out there for anyone willing to dig and do the work. She smiled, kissed me on the cheek, and said, you know, Gil's neighbor to streets over is fighting something similar. A developer's trying to use eminent domain to force him off his property for a strip mall. I raised an eyebrow. That's so, I asked, and she laughed, because she recognized that tone. She knew I was already running through what I remembered about eminent domain law and thinking of who I could call for advice. You can't help yourself, can you? She teased. I shrugged. Someone's got to stand up to bullies. Might as well be someone who knows how. So, if you're dealing with your own whole nightmare, the board member who acts like a dictator, the busybody who files complaints about every little thing, the self-appointed enforcer who twists rules to target you, share your story in the comments. The most outrageous one gets featured in next week's video, and maybe we can help you find a way out. Because no one should have to live in fear in their own home. And if you enjoy seeing bullies outsmarted by people who won't back down, hit that subscribe button. There are more stories like this coming every Tuesday. Remember, quiet professionalism always triumphs over loud tyranny. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.